Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss a proposal that's been reported that would lay down the conditions for a Scottish independence referendum in law in a similar matter to that of Irish reunification, which, if the SNP's Plan A doesn't work out, sounds like progress, doesn't it? Well, the government are planning to set it up in a way that is not, in theory, unreasonable, but given their attitude to the Brexit referendum is definitely hypocritical. But I would still argue there's an opportunity here. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the SNP and the Scottish Greens are seeking a referendum next autumn, of course. Their case for issuing one on whatever basis will be heard in the Supreme Court. I think that's still scheduled for next month. Now, if the Supreme Court says that Holyrood can proceed, then the referendum goes ahead. The result will be what it will be. But if the court rules that Holyrood can't issue the referendum, and there's every possibility that this will unfortunately be the case, then the Tories are planning, or so it's reported, on introducing a bill which sets out the playing field for a future referendum. Now, the plan is both good and bad. I mean, part of it is dependent on how you look at it, which angle. So I'm going to try and look at it from several angles. So, first of all, there should be a clear legal route to such a political outcome. It's a complete waste of public resources to have to keep getting courts to decide on these things when it should be straightforward. You know, when the EU was set up, for example, there was a clear legal route to a member state leaving. It was a process that allowed the member state to make its own decision in its own way, could choose to make that decision in whatever way it thought, and it would be respected by the rest of the union. No such process has ever existed for Scotland. The referendum that took place in 2014 was a one-off piece of legislation. It's wholly unsatisfactory that no clear process exists, so the idea of putting one forward obviously has to be welcomed. After all, this only happens if the Supreme Court rules that there is currently no way for the Scottish Parliament to claim a mandate to hold such a referendum. Now, this would in theory solve that. Second thing is that the actual conditions, which are definitely hypocritical coming from the Tories, are actually in line with how some other countries would approach the situation. There'll be people outside the UK go, well, this all seems fairly reasonable. And although supporters of Scottish independence will see it as unfair, which in a sense it is, in a sense it's not, it is also partly in line with what the SNP themselves said should happen. So before I go on, what is the plan? There are two main parts to the plan, although there'd need to be more detail to make it a workable plan. So the first part of the plan is what triggers a referendum, and the second part of the plan is how does the referendum work. So the plan is that there needs to be an indication that 60% of eligible voters want another referendum for a full year. Then, when the referendum goes ahead, over 50% of the electorate would need to support the yes vote. That's 50% of the electorate, mind you, not 50% of the people who vote. So if turnout was, say, 85%, like it was last time, you'd actually need just under 59% of the people voting to approve of independence. So let's take those two things one at a time. So first of all, the idea that 60% of voters should want a referendum before another one is issued is actually an SNP idea. This is smart politics from the Tories if they do go ahead with this plan. Now, I've always made it clear, and I will again, one of the main campaign lines from the Remain groups in 2014 was that Scotland was part of one of the big three in the EU and it would be giving that up. This is no longer the case. The impact of Brexit on the issue of Scotland's place in or out of the UK cannot be downplayed. I've always said there's clearly a mandate for another referendum for the following reasons. First, a major argument made during the last referendum has been obliterated in a big way. Second, the SNP have won virtually every Westminster seat in Scotland, and polling suggests they'd actually take even more next time. Third, there is a large majority of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament in favour of another referendum. It doesn't matter which way you look at it, there is absolutely no argument for blocking another referendum. I mean, there are political arguments, of course, but there's no sensible arguments. But the SNP did say that a feature of a subsequent referendum should be a consistent 60% support for it. They said that. Not Unionist Party, they said that. Now, I would argue they'd have been better off, rather than pushing for a second referendum all this time, pushing for a clear legal settlement that sets out the conditions for a future one. The problem with pushing for a second referendum is effectively your support for it comes from people who want Scotland to leave the UK. Whereas if you push for a legal process, you get support from both reasonable people on both sides. I mean, I would say a better system would be to let Holyrood take charge of the referendum process. In other words, they can have one whenever they like, just vote for it. But just as with the Irish border poll, it can't be less than so many years since the last one. So you can't have referendum, Remain wins, right, we'll have another one next year. That would be ridiculous. So you have to set out a period of time. But anyway, the Tories look like they want to go with the prerequisite the SNP themselves suggested. So that should be non-contentious. That should not be an issue at all because they're actually going with the SNP's idea. So now on to the next part. Now this is contentious. 50% of the electorate supporting independence, not 50% of those who vote. Now, of course, to countries who are used to issuing referenda, like Switzerland very famously, this would be fine. A Swiss would look at this and go, well, yeah. They're used to insisting on effectively supermajorities for any major constitutional change. Indeed, there's a strong argument that any large constitutional change should require a very clear majority of public support, not just the ones who turned up to vote. But this is where it gets a bit hypocritical, of course, because leaving the EU was a momentous constitutional change. Arguably as large a change as breaking up the UK, but it's certainly not far off. It's sort of on that level. When people voted to leave the EU, it was won by a very small majority of those who voted. It was nowhere near 50% of the electorate, nowhere near. If the Tories believe that such a change should need a clear majority support of the whole electorate, then they should not have proceeded with Brexit in the way they did. Because the Tories didn't just use that referendum result to leave the EU either, they used it to leave the customs union single market as well. But that was not part of the referendum vote, and it wasn't part of the campaign. All of the major Leave groups in 2016 argued that we would remain in the single market. Not just the main group, all of them. So this second aspect of the plan is genuinely contentious. Because on the one hand, there is a clear argument for a definite majority of the electorate to be in favour of something in order to make a fairly permanent constitutional change. You don't want something like that decided on a few fickle voters that could easily have gone the other way in a few months' time. But on the other hand, this proposal is being made by those who insisted that a small majority of people who voted on a single day does represent the will of the people many years later even, and gave them a blank cheque to do what they wanted. But therein also may lie the downfall of this particular plan. So you have no doubt that lots of people who are in favour of independence will be losing their shit at this news. They'll say it's outrageous. But do bear in mind that just because the Tories are thinking of doing this, it doesn't mean they can do it exactly like this. What starts off as a plan isn't necessarily exactly what the implementation at the end looks like. I would consider a couple of things. First, ask yourselves why the Tories are proposing this bill. Remember, this bill is only to come into being if the Supreme Court says that Holyrood doesn't have the authority to issue its own referendum. So why do the Tories need the bill? Because they know that they can't hold off a referendum forever. Because you'd think to yourself, well, if the Supreme Court says it's up to the Westminster government and the Westminster government's the Tories, they'll just go, well, that's fine. We'll never issue a referendum. They know that's not sustainable for the long term. They probably know they can't hold it off for very much longer, in fact. It's as clear as day to anyone with a brain that there is a clear mandate for another referendum. In fact, the easiest way to put the issue to bed would be for the Tories to grant it. The thing is, it's absolutely baffling to me. Boris Johnson should have agreed to the referendum 2 years ago. The more they resist, the more support they generate for independence. You know, even if the SNP's plan A doesn't go well, they've got their plan B. They know another referendum is coming. Sturgeon is patient. All she needs is for the wider support to remain patient. It's inevitable. And the longer they have to wait, the easier it will be to win. If the Tories really want the UK to remain together, they're going about it in very, very wrong fashion. Of course, my view is that actually a lot of Tory MPs do not want the UK to remain together. Easier for them to win power without Scotland, frankly. But then there's the second thing to consider as well. That's the House of Lords. They could easily decide that certain precedents have been set. Not only was the Brexit referendum massively impactful to our constitutional arrangements and did not require that supermajority, nor even get it, but there's already been a referendum specifically on Scottish independence. So the arrangements for that were agreed by the Tory government in Westminster. There is surely a compelling argument that it should form the basis of all future referenda until such time as all parties agree otherwise. And the thing is that if this bill is put to Parliament by the government, it'll generate a lot of public attention. Now, I would say that reasonable people on both sides of the independence argument will agree that there should at least be a clear legal process. They will also agree that the format for the referendum has already been established. The format for deciding what triggers a referendum hasn't, so that's fine. We can go with the SNP's idea. But the format for the referendum itself, that's been established. Any attempts to change it would look like dirty tricks, and indeed would be. As long as the SNP stick to their suggestion of the 60% support before a referendum, then it'll be the Tories who look like the hypocrites and might have to swallow an amended bill that keeps the first condition in, but not the second. Mind you, what's the point in discussing strategy? We're expecting the news today that Liz Truss is about to run the government. In fact, about half an hour, I think, after this video goes live. She's not exactly the most strategic operator. Even Dominic Cummings thinks she's insane. And he had a policy of specifically trying to hire what he called, in his words, oddballs. If Truss is too batty even for him, then we may not be able to expect strategic thinking on this issue any more than any other. But I would say that with this plan, you can look at the overall thing and go, look, this is the Tories trying to stack the odds in their favour, so to speak, and it's absolutely outrageous. I would see it as an opportunity. The core concept is a clear legal route to a referendum. That is assuming the Supreme Court case doesn't go well. This is an opportunity. Go with it. It's a proposal to set out a clear legal route to independence, and the details can always be worked out during the process itself. And it will be a lot easier to do that when a lot of the public are looking at it and forming their views. I would suggest people get on board with the process and get it started. Obviously, when we'll wait and see what the Supreme Court say. I mean, after all, if the SNP can't persuade people to back a sensible legal process which can attract support on both sides of the debate, how are they going to get a majority to agree on just one side of the debate? But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.